Good morning, witness. Good morning, honorable members. My name is Lubusha Andrew. I'm Member of Parliament for Chipangali constituency of Western Province and the Chairperson for Cabinet Affairs Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. And my name is Fred Jatila, Member of Parliament for Momba constituency in Monze, also the Chairperson for the Expanded Planning and Budgeting Committee. Cap 12 of the laws of Zambia gives you immunity as and when you are appearing before a committee of parliament such as this one, meaning that whatever you say, also appearing before the committee, that which you say cannot be used against you in any court of law. So take advantage of that provision. However, the same works against you in an event that you are to deliberately mislead the committee. And also just to indicate that we are live both on Parliament TV and the radio. So people out there are following the proceedings. So what we'll do is, with your indulgence, let me give you, say, 25 minutes, if you need all of it, to take us through your submission, and then we allow the honorable members of this committee to ask questions after that, then we'll be done. So you can start, sir, as and when you are ready.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much to the honorable members for this opportunity to engage. We are always humbled to come and see you. We received an invitation to come and present our views on the 2024 budget, to look at the implications, in our view, on the economy, a discussion on the fiscal framework, and some of the macroeconomic fundamentals, a discussion on debt. We have been invited to come back subsequently to discuss the annual borrowing plan, so we will discuss it in a bit more detail there as well as any other matters that may be relevant. We did submit for your information and attention a document that sort of condenses our views. I will talk you through it, and hopefully it's easy to follow thereafter. If you permit me to ask, I can see my slides are loaded, so okay, fine. So I'm able to control them from here, presumably if there's anyone else who is following. So first and foremost, it's important to note we're not privy to all the assumptions and information that is utilized for the purposes of the budget. So in that respect, we may not be as comprehensive as would be the case if we were, but we do have access to a broad range of information, withstanding, and we believe that it does provide relevant input. So the first thing that we sought to do was to put the budget into context from where we see it, because it's when we put it into context that we are able to then table what our views are on pertinent matters. We also looked at what we believe are the most significant matters. There are many in the budget, and I'm sure in the course of discussing with various people, you will cover various issues. So first and foremost, in context, unlocking economic potential, we believe, is a very significant priority. Our view is that this year's budget doesn't have many surprises, as was the case in previous years, and this is obviously a relative comparison. It's important to note, as I talk you through, the first figure which we present is the 8th National Development Plan, which we sought to compare the budget to. And so this is the context of the discussion, and we believe this is very much aligned with what has been put forward in previous budgets as well. And this is also important because when discussions arise around which sectors are getting priority, which sectors are getting incentives, it's in this context. Not all sectors will receive support and incentives to the same degree, and if we are all agreeable that the 8th National Development Plan is the foundation, then it then helps everyone focus in terms of where we are going. We also present a bit more analysis, because we believe if you read the 2024 budget in isolation, you actually you're not able to appreciate fully what is a journey that's unfolding. So we present in figure 2 a building block type of approach, where we take all three budgets together and try to see what is happening, and we do observe a thread in terms of how the process is unfolding, year after year. We described the 2022 budget as aggressive in terms of some of the changes that it brought. We described the one in 2023 as ambitious. We described this one as stable. And the reason why we believe that's the case is because one builds on the other. You don't have much which is a reversal or changes to policies that were implemented previously. So we see them as building one on the other. We also present for illustrative purposes what you might call how it all fits together. And this just helps us to understand the 8th National Development Plan being key, obviously anchored on the drive towards Vision 2030, the medium-term expenditure framework. We do have part of the budget being influenced by the IMF extended credit facility and what was agreed therein. We also take guidance from the President's speech when opening Parliament, and then from a tax administration point of view, ZRA's strategy. The aims from a policy perspective we document, and then the budget overall objectives we were asked to comment on the macros. We also highlight there just for summary. So this is putting it all onto a single page. Just to drive home the point around the building, what we perceive as the budgets building one on another, we pick just a few matters, and you can see the progression, one budget after the next. And what you also note is that none of the policies that were implemented previously has been reversed. We believe that this is positive in that it provides a stable environment, which is necessary for giving direction, especially to investors, to the corporates, to individuals as well. Sometimes it's better to have a bad and consistent policy than policies that change year after year. I'm not suggesting the policies are bad. It's just to give an illustration. We've seen a drive in the mining sector, manufacturing. You see progressively less incentives, more refining. Health, you saw quite significant changes in earlier years, and that is starting to evolve. If you go on to the next one, also aligned to this as figure 4, you see the same sort of trend, the same with the likes of CDF and its continuing expansion. So what we see is consistency and movement. So we welcome the stable approach. We also note in the process of reviewing the budget, if you go to figures 5 and 6, that progressively expenditure is being reconfigured. We've just picked a certain selection of expense areas. You see that it is coming in line with what has been outlined for us in the 8th National Development Plan. Higher spending on education and health, higher spending on social protection, as the budget is being reconfigured progressively year on year. Also important to note is that 2024 we see a substantial increase in the spending on infrastructure directly by government. If you look at it in percentage terms, going up from 3 to 5% of total spending, which is increasing as well. That is important to note because previously we've been told infrastructure would largely be undertaken through the public-private partnership model. We now have greater emphasis on other modes as well. If I can then take you through to page number 13, where we start to consider the macroeconomics. So that's the budget in context, a few comments and highlights as we see them. If I take you to page 13, where we start to consider Zambia's macroeconomy and the fiscus in the context that we see it. Okay, so the 2023 was quite challenged. Overall growth projected 2.7%, down from 5.2 previously, as well as what was forecast. This, for us, and the illustration which is up there, basically summarizes Zambia's economic story in one place, if you like. We have costs that are escalating. If you think about petroleum, if you think about food prices, a mining sector whose performance is subdued. We add to that debt negotiations, which have progressed but are still not concluded. You then have the effect of sluggish economic performance and worsening poverty levels that have been recorded. It's important to note that in our view, in as far as the targets that have been set, 4.8% does seem ambitious relative to the 2.7, but we believe that in terms of driving real economic growth is still well below where it would need to be to have sustained and meaningful impact on the local citizenry. There are various measures that have also been proposed in order to redress the situation in the budget, and I'll run through those as well as our view. But generally, we are supportive of the measures that have been implemented. I'll run you through them shortly. Suffice to say, our view is that escalating costs need to be arrested, because any progress made can be significantly impacted if especially the cost of food, the cost of petroleum, inflation is not contained. So that's something that's important. Another important message is the need to sustainably diversify the economy. We've seen how badly this year the economy has performed because of the challenges in the mining sector. So it's critical that Zambia starts to move sustainably. Now, I'm just over 40 years old. I've been hearing the story of diversification for as long as I can remember. It's something that has to happen if we're going to have a real and sustained growth into the future. It's also important to consider whether incentives are needed for sectors which are considered more social than economic. What am I talking about? Things like education and health. Generally, the focus and emphasis has been on government driving the growth of those sectors, the recruitment, the infrastructure, you name it. But if you think about it, those sectors are actually cross-cutting. They are social, but they are economic as well, with significant investment that has gone in. If we have a thriving education and health sector, even from the private side, you ensure that you're guaranteeing the quality of education, which is important, the quality of healthcare, which is important, increasing the level of competition, which brings down the prices, and at the same time, you're reducing the burden or the need for government to continue to employ at the rate that they are, which is something that we've raised from a sustainability point of view. So we summarize for the committee members a few views in terms of what is contributing to the costs. That is figure 8, what is happening with escalating costs, what actions are being put in place to mitigate, or what's proposed in the budget. As I've said, largely we're in agreement with what has been put through, although we also make the point that especially lowering food costs significantly as well as petroleum costs is unlikely in the short term, given the factors, a lot of them being external, that are contributing. If you think about petroleum, on one hand, petroleum prices globally increasing, at the same time the exchange rate depreciating, factors which are for you to control your exchange rate, as well as to an extent that it starts to erode even the impact of the higher crude petroleum prices on the global market is a challenge. We are also of the view that subsidies would not be sustainable in the short term, although it's something that we've been tempted to propose. The third block there, which is support for the vulnerable, very important, because if you can't bring down the cost, the only thing you can do in the short term is then try to alleviate the suffering of those who are most affected. We summarize the issues that are impacting the copper mining sector. That is in figure 10, at least in what's been given to us. You can see the issues and how they are contributing. So this tells you how significant mining is for Zambia and emphasizes the need to get mining working in the short term and thriving, but also the need to diversify. What are some of the matters that are highlighted in various pronouncements? Incentives, which we agree with that. Resolving the problematic areas, the likes of KCM, Mopani, other problematic situations. Enhancing artisanal mining, although it's It's an area where there's still a lot of work to be done, especially to make sure that it's done properly. The geophysical mapping, which should help with the exploration. Exploration is important. Without significant exploration and new discoveries, the ambitious challenges that have been put forward will remain ambitious, and it's important that this makes significant traction. We also welcome the establishment of the Mineral Regulation Commission. That's something that we actually called for last year and the year before when we did some of our studies, because it's important that the sector is well regulated in the process, as well as promoting value addition. In terms of, there was a question around the fiscal performance and what has been budgeted. You can see that in terms of increase from a revenue perspective, there's a 26% proposed increase in the revenues, which is something that's quite significant and ambitious, and something that does warrant consideration on an ongoing basis. Where is this expected to come from? Increasing the tax base, increasing the efficiency from a ZRA perspective, but notwithstanding, it is a challenge. Remember that anything which comes through as a shortfall in revenues that are generated has to be financed then through the borrowing plan. The borrowing plan which has already been submitted. So in case you have any significant shortfalls in revenue collection, which we know has been under pressure because of the likes of what's happening in mining, etc., you can then have some challenges on the financing side. So it's good to be ambitious, and this is something that needs to be tracked and monitored in terms of its achievability. But given what has been proposed, a lot around using digital and enhancing the sort of efficiency and effectiveness of the Zambia Revenue Authority. It's something that's been on the cards for a while, so it's something that I would encourage the honorable members to keep track of, because the more that can be collected domestically, the less that needs to be borrowed, especially if what is happening is a widening of the tax base. Given the challenges that are apparent around compliance levels and things like tax fraud, it's possible to raise the tax base and raise the tax revenues without necessarily inflicting more pain on the people that are paying the taxes. Figure 14, some interesting administrative changes that have come through. The expansion of the tax base. There's a levy that's gone through the mobile money. I know it's a bit controversial, but if you understand what is in progress, it's about shifting taxes towards transactions as opposed to directly taxing individuals irrespective. Also important, the Unified Tax Administration Act, very critical for ensuring fairness in the tax administration process. It's something that we've called for a while, and so we are happy that this is being considered. If you think about the way there is inconsistency in the way that tax, especially where there are disputes and issues with tax players, are resolved. So this will help to alleviate that. Other matters that have been highlighted, especially from the ZRA's perspective, are very important in terms of keeping tabs on what is happening, because remember, it's the budget is going to be financed through revenues collected, financing through borrowing. The more that can be collected domestically, the less the need to borrow from the markets, etc. Also important is the calibration of the fiscal deficit target at 4.8%. If that's achieved, it should have various positive knock-on effects on the economy, because if borrowing comes down, then hopefully the cost of borrowing for the local citizens and businesses can go up. To touch on debt and restructuring briefly, we present for you a high level what is happening, and this is purely on the external debt perspective. So we've given a roadmap, and this is basically figure 16, shows you what has happened so far in our understanding in illustrative form. We did make progress up to June 2023 with the official creditors. We're still waiting on the official signing of the MOU, which hasn't yet happened. We are told, based on what we hear, that it's imminent, but suffice to say it's taken longer than expected. Notwithstanding, it's significantly positive, because if you look at the way the budget has subsequently been calibrated, you can actually see that what was budgeted for debt service previously has since been reallocated to other areas, which is a positive. The challenge that we have continued to place on government is that this moratorium, this period that the government and the country is being given in terms of concessions on the official creditors, must be utilized to stimulate significant economic activity. Because if you imagine at the end of the grace period to go back and have to have another discussion about further negotiations and renegotiations of terms, I highly doubt that those conversations will be entertained. So that is very important in terms of the savings that have been generated in terms of the budget. We can argue whether it was paid or not previously. We can put that conversation aside. The fact is, the budget was constrained because it had to put in provision to service debt. You can see a significant reduction in what's been allocated towards debt service, but it must be interrogated. Where is it going? From what I've shown you previously, you can see significantly to the social sectors, which is important, but the question continue to be asked: how is this really going to stimulate the right level of economic activity so that when it's time to start paying, there is no discussions? Zambia is paying, is on track with its payments. We also present, just for information, what the whole debt restructuring means. So the official creditors debt restructuring in figure 17, that is, if you want to understand the debt restructuring on a single page, this is the whole story on a page. Very important is the answer to question 7. What was achieved in June 2023 is a 40% reduction in the net present value of what is owed to the official creditors, which is a $6.3 billion. Effectively, there is a net present value saving of $2.5 billion coming through with the extensions as well as interest reductions. In terms of the potential benefits, I think I've touched on them. These are examples of what's expected. It's not all been achieved, obviously. The exchange rate is clearly not stable, but it's something that can be delivered, especially if the private creditor side is also renegotiated, because that's where you actually see private creditors are more interested in Zambia's sovereign credit rating than the official creditors. So once you have a more favorable credit rating, then you actually see a lot more inflows than you would see just because of the official creditors. Ultimately, hopefully it's agreed that it should lead to a higher quality of life for the Zambian citizens. In terms of other sectors, and I'm wrapping up, there's obviously a significant focus on agriculture, tourism, manufacturing as the key sectors that are outlined in the 8th National Development Plan, which is fundamental. We agree with that. You also see significant focus, especially in the agriculture sector. Even if you did a word count, Chair, you'll find that the most discussed topic in the budget was agriculture. I think that's a good thing. There is obviously an opportunity and a challenge at the moment. An opportunity in terms of the demand that's there for Zambia's product, a challenge because of the cost at which it's being delivered. Notwithstanding, production and productivity needs to go up for Zambia to realize its full benefit. So to exploit regional economic opportunities, large-scale mining, the rollout of the program, this is what has been identified. We also welcome things like growing irrigation and the incentives given, which haven't reversed previously. Tourism and manufacturing also key, but again, what we see there, tourism, I think, benefiting from the infrastructure construction. For manufacturing, we see more fine-tuning what was there previously, because there's an acknowledgement that the multi-facility economic zones haven't perhaps delivered as they should. We also see, I mentioned previously, a more concerted effort around infrastructure, which we believe is very important. Why? Because PPPs are successful if the project is commercially viable. Not all infrastructure that's needed is necessarily commercially viable, especially from the onset. But it's still necessary. Therefore, we see an aggregation of the various infrastructure projects and a clear spike in infrastructure spending by the government directly, and then PPPs continuing, assets for construction being allocated to the ZNS, some through CDF, some through local government. Our view is that this needs to be consolidated, so it mustn't be disjointed, because ultimately we want a better, high-quality infrastructure for Zambia as a nation. We summarize what some of these are in different areas, but overall should benefit the country. We also support the ICT initiatives. Again, nothing too significant, but very important for the country. Electricity as well as a support, as an enabler, receiving incentives especially to stimulate generation, which is important because it's not only necessary for economic growth for use by the citizens, but also is a potential source of export revenue given demand in the region. We summarize very simply the way we understand the economic formula, if you like, in figure 24. Decentralization, incentives for concessions for investment, increased social support, investment in education and health underpinned by debt sustainability, stimulating economic activity, borrowing selectively, PPPs, sustaining budget credibility, the shift from direct to indirect taxes, which is important to deliver ultimate economic growth. We also present what we perceive as Zambia's balancing act at the moment, the positive factors and the negative factors. Positive, significant potential in key sectors such as agriculture, tourism, energy, manufacturing, etc. The benefits that will come from debt restructuring as well as fiscal discipline. That's important. On the other side, we have clear negatives that need to be contained and addressed. Currency depreciation being significant, inflation, especially food and petroleum driven, and then the mining sector's performance in terms of revamping that. This one requires a long-term view, whereas the other two are challenging. It's possible, depending on the weight of the factors on the right, you could have erosion of the benefits. Ultimately, in conclusion, Chair, we believe the budget is pretty much aligned with the first two, which are obviously built on the 8th National Development Plan. The mining is key, and needs to grow even as other sectors are given room to expand and become more dominant for Zambia. The economic challenges are key and need to be addressed, as I've discussed previously. There's obviously a need for patience, but it's clear patience is waning. Also important from our perspective is that to achieve these objectives, the private sector has a very, very significant part to play. I submit, Chair.
Great, Mr. Jue, thank you very much for the presentation. Honourable members, let me see. Honourable Samakai, Honourable Mutale, remember, then Honourable Mulebwa, then Honourable Kafaya. Okay. Then Honourable Mavumba, and Honourable Kambita, Honourable Simosi. Okay, so about 7. So we'll be taking 3. Mr. Chwe will be taking 3 per round, and then we'll be winding down. So, Honourable Samakai.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think the presentation is quite enriching. It's a very good presentation. But I take you to page 19, figure 10, where you have talked about the big issues in the mining sector. And the equation that you've made here points out to the fact that one of the factors that is eroding performance in the mining sector is that there are few new discoveries. From what is happening on the ground, I don't understand what you mean, because currently there is talk of gold, there is talk of sugilite, there is talk of lithium, and all these are things that would add value to the performance in the mining sector. Did you consider these minerals that are being discovered in your analysis?
Thank you. Honourable Mutale.
Thank you, Chair. There is an indication that the mineral royalty commission will be formed, if I got you right. But Chair, he hasn't told us what this commission will do, which is different from what is happening right now. So I would like to learn from him what difference it will bring and where it will take us. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Murebwa.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Mr. Chwe, I was looking at the rate of unemployment going high, and we have an indication that inflation is expected to drop from between 6% to 8%. How do you see this? How possible is it to balance this? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chiboyo, can you respond to those?
Okay, thank you very much. You forgive me, I didn't get all the names, but Honorable Simakai.
Samakai, yeah.
Simakai?
Samakai.
Samakai, okay. The issue around new discoveries, our view is that the way that we understand and perceive the mining sector, a significant part of being able to determine economic impact is a clear understanding of what exactly you're dealing with from a scale perspective. When you have discoveries at scale, for example, a recent discovery which is now taken the DRC's production up by 800,000 tons in the Kula Kamoa asset. When the asset was discovered, they gave an estimate of what is the expected projection from that in terms from a production perspective, what it's expected to contribute, etc., etc. If you look at Zambia and we then go into the specifics, the largest remains copper. Copper contributing, if you think about export earnings, north of 70%. If you think about tax collections, over 30% of Zambia's tax collections comes from copper. In that 30, less than 15 taxpayers, okay? Copper miners, all right? What we are saying is these minerals have been discovered. What is the extent of those minerals? At the moment, it's difficult to say categorically because we don't have the geological or the exploration information, which tells us what's the extent of the reserve, what is the expected time through which it will be produced. Because also what you want to do is once production starts, you want it to be in a manner such that the people who are producing it are also accounting for what they're producing for. It's adding to your export, it's adding to your tax collections. You don't want a situation where production is happening, there is enrichment happening, but the treasury is not benefiting. So in as far as the quantification, and we have in the course of our research asked questions such as what is Zambia's total gold reserve estimate? We have not been able to get a clear answer. We have asked questions like, even for example, there's discussion around, there's excitement about cobalt and the EV process. If you actually ask a question, what is Zambia's cobalt reserve? It's hard to find an answer, right? So it's in that context that we say, it goes back to the earlier point that the need for exploration. So when we talk the exploration, it's not just copper, it's all those need to be surveyed, need to be understood in full, and then a plan then developed, which then ensures that we are exploiting and getting value from the resource, but that resource is adding to the extent that it should to the treasury. I believe that's one of the challenges, for example, with gold mining and the unstructured manner in which it started, that it's happening, you know it's happening, but the treasury is not seeing the benefits. When we did a study last year, Honorable, around the mining sector, we got a statistic from the Commissioner General that there are over 2,000 parties that are registered for mineral royalty taxes, okay? So you can discount those who are potentially not actually mining. Less than 10% are actually, if you look at in terms of the number of registered parties, are actually the ones who are filing their actual returns. So there is a challenge. There's an opportunity, yes, but I think it needs to be properly understood, because then we can come and say we have X in terms of our resources for lithium, X in terms of estimated reserves. Even the copper reserves at the moment are still at 20 million tons, and it's been static at that level for a number of years. It hasn't moved for a while. It's only now that you're seeing exploration activity, what's happening with the likes of Rio Tinto, Anglo Cobalt, that you now expect to get even our biggest asset, which is supposed to be driving us to 3 million tons. Where are those 3 million tons going to come from? It's now that you're starting to see exploration activity. So it's in that context. So the opportunity is significant, but it needs to be then quantified so that it's fully understood and then properly exploited so that it benefits the country as it should. I think that's how I would respond to that question. Around the Mineral Regulation Commission, the way that I like to explain this one is fairly simplistically. At the moment, the reality of the situation is that the regulation of the mining sector is largely the remit of the Ministry of Mines and Minerals Development and other agencies. So you've got ZEMA doing their bit, etc., etc. Now, it's worldwide. Mining is a complex industry. Everywhere in the world, there is a group of experts that sits and assesses what is happening in the mine. What are you producing? What are you declaring? What are your safety practices? What are your environmental practices? Are you sticking to the conditions of your mining licenses? In Zambia, who does that? It may be done, but it's done in a disjointed manner. A simple way to put it, Honorable, is if you look at any complex industry in this country, if you look at banking, the bankers deal with Dr. Kalialia and the Bank of Zambia. The insurers deal with the pensions and insurance. The telecommunications company, before they go to the ministry, they deal with ZICTA. All complex industries have got technocrats and experts aside from government. Yes, there may be government agencies. The ERB, for example, with energy. Who is that for the mining sector? At the moment, it's direct between the ministry and the miners on the other hand. What you need in order to regulate this industry is a group of specialists and experts whose full-time job it is to oversee what's happening in that sector. And this is not to suggest that you are imposing more regulation. If someone is compliant and doing the right thing, the burden of regulation and compliance should be minimal. The issue is, as I've alluded to, there is a significant degree of non-compliance identified by government agencies themselves. Who best to plug this? Yes, the ZRA is doing what they need to do, but you can actually accelerate that through a regulation commission, and it's something that's been proven around the world. All major mining jurisdictions, Chile, Australia, Canada, you name them, have got dedicated specialists. They don't do it exactly the same way, so models differ, but it is important. There was also a question around the rate of unemployment going up and inflation 6 to 8%. So maybe to clarify, the inflation 6 to 8% is a target. That's the target that's been set. It's the same targets that's in the 8th National Development Plan, the medium-term expenditure framework, etc. Currently, inflation is at 12%. The lowest it's been in the last 2 years is about 9.7%. It started creeping up. So it was just over 9.5%, and it started creeping up subsequently. It's then jumped from 10 to 12. That is a reflection of the pressures that I spoke about in different parts of the economy. It's a good ambition to have. Is it achievable? I think it's a challenge. The Bank of Zambia themselves have said in the short to medium term it's likely to be unachievable because of the pressures that are there on the food side as well as the non-food side if you think about petroleum. But this is where the country is trying to get to, because it's expected that at this level you're able to have real economic growth which delivers real value to people. So it's a challenge, yes, to achieve, but it's the right target to have. I think that's how I would put it in this perspective.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Kafoya.
Honorable Chair, let me thank you for giving me this opportunity to interact with Mr. Chibuye. And as I do,
Honorable members, can we concentrate?
I want to appreciate his presentation, I think, which is very professional. even the manner in which it has been created. In such way, just by way of a pedestrian comment, when you talked about the mobile money tax, you said the aim is to move towards the taxing transactions. In such way, some of those transactions may be financing or may be supporting loss-making survival ventures for the poor majority Zambians. My question, Honorable Chair, I looked at the expenditure schedule from the budget, and out of there, I have isolated all the figures which are outstanding figures, meaning these are figures which should have been paid in 2023 and before, but will be paid in 2024. The total is 59.3 billion kwacha. And from what we have been discussing, I have to say this is understated, because when you go to the borrowing plan, you will see that the minister is going to borrow 83 billion, and then he's going to pay some of it to maturities, and the balance is what he has taken as the net borrowing to finance the budget. So from that perspective, I think this budget is clearly understated by that difference. So when you look at all these outstanding payments from previous years to be paid in 2024, what would be your comment if you were told that 2023 budget is a credible budget? Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Is it 2023 or 2024? 2023, the current one. Okay. Honorable Mabumba.
Mr. Chibuye, taking you to page 6 of your presentation in figure 1 there, where you have indicated the strategic development areas of our 8th National Development Plan and the drivers and the enablers. In the context of the 2024 budget, and therein the measures provided in, would you think they are sufficient enough progressively, because I wouldn't say 1 year would be, maybe progressively, to unlock the potential that lies in the agricultural sector, manufacturing sector, mining, and tourism? And probably the energy sector, like you said, we can become a net exporter of power. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Honorable Kamita.
Okay. Mr. Chibuye, I was just looking at your comprehensive submission. I noticed that you have literally analyzed the budget the way it is, helping us, of course, to understand the budget. Your submission is valuable because it helps us understand the budget in a pictorial way, and it's very good for that. Except there are a few things that I would want you to help us as a committee in you giving your opinion, for instance, and probably suggestions of what you would think we can pass on to the Minister of Finance as we debate this budget on the floor of the House. A case in point is on the tax policy amendments that I have observed, and I don't know which page your submission they appear on in your submission, but it's about the tax policy amendments. There is the issue of broadening the tax base, okay? There is also the issue of the tax system, improving the efficiencies in the tax system. But again, what I seek from you as an expert, both in taxation and in accounting, is do you think the proposed policies to broaden the tax base are sufficient? Because what would help us most is to hear from you as an expert to say, look, because most of you commentators, especially the accountants, have heard, let's broaden the tax base to collect more taxes. But usually there is nobody who comes to say, no, no, no. I think, look, it is this, in this particular area where you can actually broaden the tax base. Here we are, somebody suggested, and I think the minister has suggested on his own, the broadening the tax base through a small taxation through the mobile money transactions, which cannot be felt by anyone. But I've seen in some circles people already attacking this. But would you suggest any other outside of this which has been suggested in terms of broadening the tax base, including the improvement of the tax system?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chiboyo, can you respond to those?
Thank you very much. So there's a comment linked to your last comment. I think that I'll touch on when I get to. So that's Honorable Kafwaya. The expenditure schedule, in terms of what is carried forward. Now, if we take a step back, progressively, the country has been, because basically what you're discussing is arrears, right? In terms of what has been contracted and unpaid. And progressively, for a number of years, that number has been increasing, such that, and you'll see in my submission on debt, there is a comment that there is a need to focus on local debt as well, right? So we talk about a lot of focus is given on the external, it's public, it's known, but there is need to focus on the internal. And you have sentiment and views from the government around what the plan is there, but it's clear. So that we start with. So the question then is regarding the credibility of the budget itself, right? There's different factors. I'm not privy to the specific list of items that haven't been paid. So if you excuse me, I'll perhaps speak in a bit more general terms, right? You've got arrears for suppliers. You've got arrears for things like VAT, refunds, which are dominant. Previously, we used to hear about fuel arrears and things like that. All of those obviously mean something is not happening where it should, because when you start with the budget as is, and if you think about the budget, especially this last year's budget, from a revenue perspective, basically slightly above target. From an expenditure perspective, slightly below target, right? And that has been the trend for the last 2 or 3 years in terms of, are we spending only what we planned to spend? So that's step number one. So in that regard, the expenditure is, there is consistency in that regard. The question is, are we spending only what we have? Because remember, what you plan to spend and what you have are different. That's why you have a financing gap, and that's why we're discussing the annual borrowing plan tomorrow. And you can see that even in that regard, the planned borrowing is actually less than, the actual borrowing is less than the planned. So what you have is a situation, and if you go back, because you've got this problem, which is arrears, and part of it is also because the budget is prepared on a cash basis. You have these numbers which are not necessarily in the books, but are there and need to be dealt with. You then have this problem of how do you deal with this? Because you can't, at some point, the numbers that you are mentioning is equivalent to everything that will be collected in 1 year. So it's impractical to deal with it at a particular point in time. So what we then see, and hopefully when we discuss the annual borrowing plan, it's a bit clearer, though I don't think I have all the information, but between now and tomorrow our attempt to, is how are those numbers now being managed and progressively brought down. If you observe things like, for example, government bonds, treasury bills, you see that progressively year on year, they're increasing only marginally. So you don't have, we had a period where there was a very vast increase, but now it's increasing just marginally year on year. If you look at what's happening with borrowing externally, again, every year it's increasing, but we're given the explanation as it's either disbursements of previously agreed loans, or only what's concessional, so it's only increasing marginally. So there is a problem, obviously, with arrears. there is a problem without a doubt. But what you can see is that the rate at which it's spiking has definitely come down quite significantly, and it's something that does warrant attention. Does it then mean the overall budget is not credible? I probably wouldn't go that far, because the challenge has been known. So the question then is, what actions are there in the budget which are helping to address and alleviate that situation? There was a question around 8th National Development Plan from Honorable Mavumba. Are the actions sufficient to unlock the sectors? I think there's always more that can be done. The context of the budgets as we see them, the main limitations, especially previous periods, the extent of borrowing and what needed to be set aside for borrowing. So if you look at last year's budget, the previous year's budget, even this year's budget, there is still a significant amount that is budgeted for borrowing, which is locked up there. Until you agree terms, especially with private creditors, you can't assume that they'll give you debt relief, right? So you have to budget for it. In fact, it would be counterintuitive not to do that. So the question then is, in the context of what's available, is everything being done? We think there's probably things you can do. For example, progressively, we have a thought. We have significant tax. We are trying to stimulate investment, trying to stimulate growth, yet we have taxes on investments, right? So you go and buy an asset, and you have significant customs duties, excise duties, VATs, yet you're buying equipment and assets that are going to come and generate activity for you. So what incentive do you have, or in that cost? I mean, it's common practice around the world, but there should be a thought to say, how do we make it easier for large-scale capital investment, which is actually going to stimulate the economy? All of that would benefit multiple sectors. But in the context of where we are at the moment, I think there's more that could be done, but we also believe there's constraints, and I think as those constraints are unlocked, perhaps we'll see more. Let's not forget, in the first two budgets, there were some fairly significant and dramatic announcements, which even surprised some of us. Those have been sustained. So the fact that they've been sustained, we think it only makes sense that before you give anything more, at least fine-tune or try and make sure that it's working, so that if at all you're perhaps going to reduce in an area and increase in another, at least what was done previously you are clear about. Around tax policy amendments and broadening the tax base. So I think it's fair comment that indeed we've spent a lot of time analyzing what's there. Honorable Kambita, you know that in the process of preparing the budget, we do spend quite a bit of time making various submissions to the government which are considered. We are also alive to the fact that with resources limited, it's a challenge to give everything and anything. But from a principal perspective, the move from direct to indirect taxes is important in broadening the tax base, if we speak from a principal perspective, because it's stimulated at the point a transaction is undertaken, it's efficient, it's easier to collect. If you think about all the challenges that are there from a compliance perspective, it largely stems because you need the taxpayer themselves who's bearing the tax to make an action. If at the point they are spending, they've already done what they needed to do, yes, there is a challenge still with someone else who needs to collect, but you often find that those taxes, transaction taxes, are easier to track, monitor, and then deal with. So in terms of specifics, especially in terms of being able to deliver at scale, perhaps I wouldn't go into too much detail there, but it's to say that the shifting progressively, because you also need to see a balancing act. In last year's budget, on the 2022 budget, there was a move of corporate income tax from 35% to 30%. All right, that was a direct tax adjustment. Every year in the budgets, there have been adjustments to pay as you earn progressively. Those are direct tax adjustments. The books need to be balanced somewhere. And as you shift, because remember, when you move the burden from direct taxpayers, 600,000-700,000 employees get a benefit. When you then tax transactions, automatically you're opening yourself as a potential source to much lower amount, but being spread over a significant number. It's clear that if you look at even the statistics from a POA, things like POA perspective, the working class bear a disproportionate amount of the load relative to everyone else. The only thing is some of these transaction taxes still come and add to the tax burden of the working class, but in the process, broaden it at the same time. So I think that's what I would say in response. Thank you.
Sorry, Honorable Sumushi, the last one.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity. I want to speak to the issue of increasing our domestic tax revenue collections so that the funding of the budget can anchor on the same. And I think if we do that, then definitely, I think the burden that we have in terms of financing our budget, I think will be reduced. But now, when you look at the measures that have been put in place to enhance the domestic tax revenue from ZRI, I'm just trying to think aloud in terms of, have we done any projections in terms of enhancing the same, so that maybe at some point we can see ourselves financing our budget. Maybe 90% of our budget can be financed from domestic revenues. So is there any projection, especially given the issue of the debt that we are also trying to sort out?
Thank you. Can I respond to that one?
Thank you very much, Honorable. So yes, so that's basically where the estimate is, that's where basically the increase is projected of 26% in terms of the total revenue that's to be generated, which we thought is something which is ambitious to achieve, but notwithstanding is a target that has been set. Now, in terms of, so there are different metrics first and foremost that are considered when looking at what is a reasonable target for revenue collections. The easiest one is what is your domestic tax revenue to gross domestic product. How do they compare? The study that we've done shows Zambia's tax to GDP ratio at around 17.8% for the last year lags behind most of our neighboring countries. And what we did was we picked countries, maybe not exactly the same in terms of demographic, but at least largely mining dependent. So if you think about Botswana, Namibia, you throw in South Africa, obviously the dynamics are different. Compared to an OECD average, you find Zambia, most of them are between 20, 21, 22%. Zambia at 17.8% is obviously below. So that's the starting point. That gives us an idea of what the potential is, or at least what we should be aiming and aspiring for. In terms of the specifics of how this is going to be achieved, it's a topic that's been on the table for a while now, and the essence of what is being put forward is that the use of technology and improving the efficiency with which taxes are collected will be enhanced. So for example, this morning I woke up to a message from the ZRA telling me that my employer had paid my taxes, which were due yesterday, right? So what they are now on, in order to try and mitigate fraud, there's some innovative suggestions, such as you need to be aware of what's supposed to happen from a compliance perspective. Should I not get this SMS next month, for example, I can go to ZRA. If ZRA investigate and find that my employers, although I own the company, so I'd be putting myself in trouble. But as an example, go and find that there is actual non-compliance, I can actually be rewarded in the process. So they're innovative, and they're both innovative and creative approaches that are being put forward to stimulate and improve compliance on one hand, and that should contribute. On the other hand, making it easier and to identify who hasn't paid, as well as contribute to the total taxes and pay, I think should also contribute. Will it deliver the entire 26%? It will be a challenge. And why is it a challenge? Because included in all of this is the mining sector. However, there is potential upside in the mining side, because if you think about it, exchange rate, copper prices have been fairly sustained. At the same time, the exchange rate is depreciating. So what happens is that every dollar they collect when it converted to tax revenues is higher. And then on top of that, you then expect the likes of, in the short term, hopefully, KCM Mopani to start contributing as well to offset some of the production challenges that were there in previous mines. So they could be, I believe there will definitely be an increase in the total tax collections. If you just think about if Mopani comes online, if KCM comes online, if the exchange rate remains where it is, then by default, because of how much the mining sector contributes, you should see some upside. Will it be to the full 26%? We'll wait and see.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chiwe. We end here for today. Thank you very much once again for coming. Cap 12, in terms of the immunity, that which was conferred on you earlier on, also end here for now. You have indicated, I think we have an interaction with you at some point. Is it tomorrow? Yes. Also, yes, so we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much for coming.
You can now advertise on Parliament Television and Parliament Radio. For more information, call 0977 854102 or 0977 536487. Parliament Television, bringing Parliament closer to you. You can just excuse us just for 2 minutes. Sorry. Okay, just.
nation, stand and sing of Zambia, proud and free. It must be taught to all our young people, to all our people in Zambia, each in various languages, and in those languages, the meaning of those words is the same. The same. Let the people understand exactly why they sing what they do.
Okay, honorable members, meeting is called to order. Our colleagues from Caritas Zambia, you are welcome. Thank you. You are appearing before the expanded planning and budgeting committee, where we are just doing a look at, we are looking at the 2024 national budget as pronounced by the Minister of Finance and National Planning. And it's good always. You have never shied away from appearing when called upon to. So what we'll do is I'll allow you to introduce just the two of you, introduce yourselves. The members will do that as we interact further in the course of your presentation. And also just to indicate that we are live on both Parliament TV and radio. And finally, Cap 12 of the laws of Zambia gives you immunity when you are appearing before a committee of parliament such as this one, meaning that whatever you say whilst appearing in this committee, that which you say cannot be used against you in any court of law. So take advantage of that provisions. However, the same immunity works, the same provision works against you in an event that you were to deliberately mislead the committee. Okay, having said that, let's go into introductions. You can introduce yourselves.
Thank you so much, Chair. My name is Chepa Twatashalesa. I'm a programs officer at Caritas Zambia under the Economic and Social Accountability Program.
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Edmond Kangamgazi. I'm also from Caritas Zambia.
Thank you. And I'm Fred Jatila, Member of Parliament for Momba constituency, with the chairperson for this committee. So your submission, I know it has just come, we have about 9 pages. We'll give you about, say, 20 minutes, if you need all of it, to take us through your submission, and then we'll give another maybe 10, 15 minutes for the members to ask questions, and then we'll close. So you can start.
Thank you so much. We'll start by introducing our organization. So Caritas Zambia is a faith-based organization that is run by the Zambia Conference of Catholic Bishops, established in 1986. Then may I also make mention that it does permeate from the national level of parishes, which are the communities, consistent with the structure of the Catholic Church. So at the lower levels, we have parishes with their outstations as well as small Christian communities. Our vision mainly is to have a Zambian society where everyone attains integral human development. So this is implementing through 4 programs. Firstly, the Economic and Social Accountability Program. Then we have the Democracy and Governance Program, the Livelihoods and Climate Change Adaptation Program, Child Protection and Peace Building Program. Then moving to our analysis, may I make mention that our organization is driven by the social teachings of the Church. So our analysis was mainly based off on the social teachings of the Church, as well as the researches that we have conducted in the areas in which we work in, as well as researches that have been conducted by other like-minded stakeholders. So for starters, as Caritas Zambia, we want a budget that will lead the economy back to high GDP growth rates of about 7 to 8% per annum at the earliest possible time. Growth of income is important in itself, and it's important for the resources that it brings in. These resources are supposed to provide us with the means to bridge the critical gaps that remain in our developmental efforts, particularly with regard to the welfare of the vulnerable segments of our population. Then also, secondly, we are looking for a budget that deepens and broadens the agenda for inclusive development, and to ensure that no individual, community, or region is denied the opportunity to participate in and benefit from the development process. Thirdly, the third aspect is that we want a budget that re-energizes government and improves delivery mechanisms. Our public institutions must provide high-quality public services, security, and the rule of law to all citizens with transparency and accountability. Then also want to look at how poverty will be reduced in the country and improve the lives of the people. I think to continue, I will hand over to my colleague.
Thank you. Chair, I would allow you to probably go to, you can start from page 6. I think that summarizes our submission. We acknowledge that the government has made a number of macroeconomic targets for the year 2024. However, I think what we are looking at, or what we are missing in that particular fundamental macroeconomic indicators, is the aspect of where we haven't seen the government actually trying to target how many people they're going to employ. If you read the budget itself, it makes a lot of mention about issues of job creation, which is a good thing. However, we want to see how many jobs are we going to be creating. If we're going to look at, now we're talking about high poverty levels in the country and high unemployment rates. So we need to look at how many jobs are we going to create by the end of the year, so that we can become more deliberate in terms of meeting those particular targets. So for us, we see that the lack of emphasis on employment, particularly in Zambian youth, and the inadequate focus on skills building and industrial sector development was one of the shortcomings that we actually saw in the budget. Because we need to look at, if you look at tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, mining, all these sectors are good sectors, yes, and there is an emphasis in the budget. But how many jobs are we going to create at the end of 2024? I think these are the things that we need to be looking at. The government also needs to be quite deliberate on that particular fact. The second thing is that we need to build an industrial base that adds value to newly discovered greatest potential. We're talking about critical minerals. Now Zambia is one of the countries that the world is depending on in terms of extracting of critical minerals. And we're talking about issues of transitional energy. So if you look at the budget itself, I think it makes little mention, or actually no mention, of issues of critical minerals or how we're going to benefit as a country from that. Even so, we're talking about, I think for many, many years now, we've been talking about issues of value addition. Zambia, I think, is rich in a lot of minerals, but how do we capitalize on that? And how do we ensure that now, if you look at Southern Province, Luapula, we're talking about issues of lithium being mined. How do we take advantage of that in terms of how do we also ensure that the industrial base is actually developing from that? And unfortunately, we looked at the 2024 budget and we saw that as actually missing. And now we're talking about issues of, we need to develop the country. And this is where now we're talking about, I think a few weeks ago, we're told almost the poverty statistics have gone up to 60% of people actually living in poverty. So what we are looking at now is how does the government respond to that? How is the government trying to reduce the poverty levels? So when we look at that, and we thought probably the government or this particular budget will actually deal with that. But unfortunately, we didn't see that particular aspect. Even so, if you look at the third point that we have, is that we note that the budget is inadequate spending on the agriculture sector. I think over the years we've been talking about how do we ensure that the agriculture sector is viable, productive, and if you look at the majority of Zambians now, most of them are actually in the agriculture sector. So how do we ensure that the agriculture sector becomes more viable, more productive? It's not just about us taking farmers' input support there, but how do we ensure that extension services are actually working? Talk about livestock is actually working. So if we look at what we have now, I think we haven't seen that particular emphasis in terms of how do we revive the agriculture sector. Now in the advent of climate change, in as much as we talk about issues of fertilizer, we talk about issues of poor rain patterns, how do we position ourselves that Zambia and even just agriculture sector position itself in such a way that they become viable? And now we're talking about a lot of shortages. Now we're talking about high prices of maize. How do we ensure that in the next 2024, how do we ensure that we have a bumper harvest? How do we ensure that the prices of meal actually reduces? But we don't see those particular things in the budget itself. The fourth aspect is that we're looking at governments must demonstrate greater concern for the Zambian people. As it is now, coming from Kaita, Zambia, and we look at issues of integral human development, as my colleague alluded to, we look at issues of material development and spiritual development. To that, and one of the sectors that we really look at is issues of education, healthy, and social protection. So if you look at the increment in both social protection, health, and education, we have seen an increment, which is a good thing. And we would like to commend the government for that particular increment. But let's look at the challenges that the sector has been facing. Talk about health sector. We have been seeing a lot of shortages about issues of medicine. We talk about issues of health personnel. We talk about issues of just having the right equipment in the hospitals. No wonder we see a lot of our policymakers actually going to other countries, because we see that the health sector do not have that personnel or equipment to actually deal with some of the diseases. So if you look at the increment now, we're talking about the health sector now has increased to 17%, and the education sector has gone to 15%. But you look at the challenges that we're facing. They're quite huge. We're just coming from COVID pandemic now, in as much as it hasn't ended, but it brought in a lot of toll on the particular sector. And if you look at the health sector itself, we really need to see an increment in terms of a bigger increment in terms of allocation to that particular sector. Because the issue is the diseases that we have there. We're talking about COVID, HIV, malaria. They need quite a huge amount of money to be allocated to the sector for us to actually make a dent in that particular sector. Talk about issues of social protection. The increment is good, or the increment, we have seen an increment from 0.6% to 8%. But this is a sector where we're looking at reducing the suffering of the people, looking at issues of poverty, deprivation, and those who are vulnerable. So we're going to spend about 9 million towards that particular sector. Sure, is this enough? A few weeks ago, we're told we have 14 million people who are living in poverty. They can't afford food, shelter, and clothing. 14 million people. And if we divide that by 14 million people, we're going to spend about 690 kwacha per person to bring them out of poverty. That's almost impossible, Chair. So we're looking at how we just needed to see a more deliberate policies and strategies of the government actually trying to deal with the poverty levels. Now that they're seeing that it shouldn't be business as usual. Now that we have seen that poverty has actually increased, we were expecting that the government now emphasis was going to be more on issues of poverty reduction, and how do we ensure that we don't see a lot of more people actually falling in that particular bracket. The fifth point, Chair, the cost of living in Zambia is quite high. It has really increased over the past 3 years. A bag of meal is almost going to 300 kwacha now. Electricity is just high. Fuel is increasing. So if you look at the cost of living, it's quite high. A very few people can actually manage now to actually live throughout the month. And government has increased the threshold now to 5,100. We're looking at an increment of 300 kwacha. Looking at the poverty levels, Chair, and now if you also look at the food basket of JCTI, it's telling us a family of 6, we need 9,300. Civil society has already given an indicator of what is the minimum that we need to actually help people out of poverty or make them have a dignified life. But Chair, the increment to 5,100 is just not enough. We still are going to be seeing a lot of people wallowing in poverty because of the increment, and that increment will just not even make a dent on a lot of people's lives. Our sixth point, Chair, is that now we are seeing the advent of climate change. This comes with a lot of costs, and we are hoping that the government now will respond towards issues of climate change through an increase of the budget allocation even just seeing a strategies in terms of how do we deal or insulate ourselves and the population away from issues of climate change. We acknowledge that the government actually increased the budgets on issues of environmental protection. But Chair, 0.8% of the budget towards climate change protection is not enough. If we look at issues of climate change, if the temperatures now increase by 1.5%, even just 2%, Chair, everything that we have said that we'll do in this budget will be thrown out. So the more reasons that we think as Caritas Zambia that government needed to put more emphasis on issues of climate change and environmental protection. Our 7th point, Chair. We acknowledge and we're happy that CDF has increased. I think CDF really makes a difference at local level. The budget now has proposed to increase the CDF from 28 to almost 30 million, which is a good thing. But Chair, our problem is the aspect of disbursement. We talk about all these huge figures, but when you talk about issues of disbursement, we talk about now 2023. Not all constituencies have received the CDF allocation. So, and we're only remaining with about 3 months. It's almost impossible for the constituency to actually finish those funds that we have allocated them. And we're only talking about 28 million. Now we're increasing it to 30 million, which is a good thing. But we need to look at issues of, first of all, absorptive capacity and the aspect of Ministry of Finance actually releasing the funds on time. So we can talk about all these nice figures, but if disbursement is not there, these figures will not mean anything to anyone. Lastly, Chair, one thing that we think that is a missed opportunity for this particular budget is the aspect of small-scale and artisanal mining. This is a game changer, Chair. As it is now, Zambia is very rich in minerals. Talk about any minerals, gold, almost every month we hear one constituency has discovered minerals. Now we're talking about a lot of gold sites. And the people who are mining those are artisanal and small-scale miners. We haven't really seen where the government deliberately makes an effort to actually harness this potential. In as much as we're talking about unlocking potential, Chair, potential is in this sector. But however, we haven't seen the government really making an emphasis on that. In as much as we talk about diversification, once this sector is doing fine, it's easier to diversify because the money will be there. We're going to take the money to agriculture, we're going to take money to mining or to manufacturing, tourism. We'll be able to develop the country. But once we leave this sector unharnessed and unsupervised, we're still going to have the same problems that we've been having for the many, many years. Chair, in conclusion, we have a lot of problems in Zambia. And we need to be quite emphatic, deliberate in terms of how we deal with those particular problems. And we are depending on this particular government to deal with those problems. We can't deal with them holistically in 1 year. But we need to find ways of how we're making progressively and dealing with those particular problems. And we shouldn't at any point depend on foreigners to actually to remove those particular problems. Or even so, we need to deal and empower the Zambian people themselves to actually unlock the potential. Because the potential is in Zambians. We shouldn't bring in foreign investors or depend on foreign investors to actually unlock that potential. We need to empower Zambians. And that's where we see that I think we haven't seen that deliberate effort from the government in terms of how do we deal with the poverty levels. Job creation, yes, we can have jobs, we can create jobs. But sometimes jobs lock people in poverty. Because we're not talking about what kind of quality jobs are we providing for the people. So unfortunately, Chair, we haven't seen the budget really talking about issues of poverty reduction, how they're going to deal with the 14 million people that are in poverty now. But in terms of investment, yes, we have seen the budget actually making an emphasis on that particular investment, but we think it's not enough. Chair, I think that's the conclusion of our paper as Caritas Zambia. Thank you very much.
Caritas Zambia, thank you very much for that presentation. Honorable members, Honorable Nkuluksa, Honorable Mulunda, Honorable Kasawata, in that order. Okay, I've seen. Yes, please, you can start.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Caritas, for this good presentation. I was trying to put a question on each and every, but I discovered maybe the question would be the same. I've liked the issue of highlighting we should have increased this, we should have put more money in this, we should have put more money in this. It's like a child of mine who knows my salary is only 10,000 kwacha. And he comes and says, Daddy, you should have put more money on that, more money on that, without telling me that you should have reduced your drinking here so that this money you take it there. You should have not gone to London for holiday so that this money you take it there. Then that becomes a more than just to tell me you should have increased, you should have increased. Where do you think as Caritas we should have gotten the money within the budget, transferred the money to put in the areas that you think are more, make more economic sense, and remove from those that are not making economic sense? I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Honorable Mulunda. Your mic, Honorable Nkuluksa.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, listening to Caritas Zambia, I get a few gaps here and there. I'll start with CDF. I don't understand. Maybe I didn't get him very well when he says some constituencies have not received this fund. I think that's, I would want to get it from him. By the way, I'm the chairperson for local government accounts, and we deal with the CDF. And as far as I'm concerned, that money is released as and when you make returns. And that has been done from every constituency. Me being a member of parliament, I've received the money. And if there are constituencies that have not received the money, that is not to my knowledge, but I thought the disbursement has been done. Second one is when you say the budget do not speak about figures, I think in the budget, when the minister was presenting the budget, I think I had some figures in education and in health. Number three, when you say, just like I want to write on my colleague's submission, when you say what is government doing to reduce the poverty levels? Yes, we appreciate that, but what is government doing? Then what is the advice that we get from Caritas Zambia that we should have done this? I know the government has shown interest or put some efforts in agriculture, that people are, by establishing maybe the production of fertilizer, just getting and creating a window for civil servants, you know, that is to increase production. So I want to get it from Caritas. What's their suggestion in terms of reducing the poverty levels in this country? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Honorable Kasawata.
Thank you very much, Chair. Caritas Zambia, thank you very much for this presentation. Yeah, mine's also on the cost of living. Definitely no one can say no, and no one can dispute about that fact on the ground. Yeah, the cost of meal has gone up, and some of the essential food stuff also have gone up. In your presentation, you did say that the government really needs to empower Zambians.
I just wanted to find out what kind of empowerment is the empowerment under Citizen Economic Empowerment Fund. Okay, what is your comment on that one? And your comment under CDF component on women and youth empowerment. Then also I need to hear also a comment from the Youth Empowerment also Fund
Honorable members.
or developmental programs under Ministry of Youth. Then, Chair, there was also an issue of a poverty reduction, that this budget did not talk much on how we are going to reduce poverty in this country. But in the budget, I think I heard the minister, and it's there written in black and white, where the Minister of Finance, did mention that there will be a lot of land be allocated to small-scale farmers, those who want land, and a lot of money, millions of kwacha, have put aside to help those farmers in those farming blocks, and even to create also roads and to put electricity, to drill, to construct dams and boreholes, so that we can improve, we can increase production and improve productivity also at a farm level. So I just want to hear a comment from you, Caritas Zambia, that is that not one of the ways, of trying to reduce poverty amongst the Zambian citizens? Thank you so much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Caritas, you can respond to those.
Thank you, Chair. The theme, if I can answer, the theme for 2024 budgets talks about unlocking economic potential. Meaning that we have this potential that we need to unlock. Then once we unlock the potential, in as much as we talk about we don't have enough revenues, meaning that we're going to have enough revenues now. And over the years, I think potential for Zambia has always been in the mining sector. We always say when the mining sector sneezes, the whole economy catches a flu, which has been the case for many years. Over the years, I think just the past 2 years, we talk about issues of mining companies doing tax avoidance, illicit financial flows. We've been talking about how we're losing a lot of revenues from the mining sector. If you look at, and we also made mention that we have the small scale and artisanal sector, which remains untapped. Once we correct or we clean up this particular sector, Zambia is going to have a lot of resources to deal with some of these problems. We just went to the IMF to get the money, to get a loan there. Zambia could have enough potential to actually raise that particular funds. If we close the loopholes that we have in the mining sector in terms of tax leakages, mining companies not paying their rightful tax, adjust the tax there. Look at the artisanal mining. How much are we getting from artisanal mining? The past years we have been seeing a lot of people mining gold. How much have we gotten from Zambia in terms of how much of that money has gone to the government coffers? Very little. So we're looking at how do we close all these gaps that we're having. Once we close these gaps, the pot is going to be full in terms of the money that we need. So looking at issues of potential, we do the mining itself. Why don't we do value addition? We are mining now, copper. Why don't we do value addition to copper? Gemstone, we have a lot of gemstones in Lufwanyama. We go and auction them. Why don't we do value addition in Zambia? And before we actually export them or take them to auctions. We're talking about issues of gold mining now in Kasenseli, in Eastern Province, in Mumbwa. We are doing a lot of gold mining now. What is happening with that gold? We're just exporting it as it is. Zambia has a potential to actually do value addition to that. And that's the aspect of why we're looking at issues of unlocking Zambia's potential. So, in as much as we talk about the potential, but how have we unlocked this particular potential? Once we unlock this potential, because if you look at artisanal and small-scale mining, ideally, that sector is being run by Zambians, or should be run by Zambians. Once you do value addition, meaning that you're going to create jobs for the actual Zambians, do the actual support. I think there has been a lot of mention about economic citizen empowerment, youth empowerment. Support those particular youth in those particular sector. They are going to become entrepreneurs, not employees. So once that is done, we are going to see a dent in terms of issues of poverty reduction. We talk about issues of job creation. Yes, we're going to, the budget mentions there'll be 4,000 and 3,000 jobs actually created in the health sector and the education sector, which is a good thing. But the question that Caritas is asking, what is the shortfall of health personnel in the health sector? We can increase, we can hire 3,000 nurses and doctors, but what is the actual shortfall? Maybe the actual shortfall is 25,000, and we are only employing 4,000 per year. What does that make in terms of the stress levels of the health personnel that we're actually hiring? Talk about the education sector. We are going to hire 4,000 teachers, teachers or health or education personnel. Now we're talking about issues, and we're going to increase, I think there is also mention that there are schools and hospitals that are going to be built. Those who need teachers and also need nurses or healthy personnel. What is the shortfall of personnel in the education sector? So in as much as we are talking about these numbers, the numbers are good, but they will be better if we know the shortfall. Because maybe the shortfall is 4,000, or maybe the shortfall is 2,000, and we're hiring 4,000. We're overflooding the sector. So the government is not telling us what the shortfall is, but it's telling us how many people they're going to employ, which is a good thing. But we need more details to this before we praise. So, and that's our contentions. We need figures that can actually, why is the government hiring 4,000? Last year we hired 4,000, this year we're hiring 4,000. What's the rationale? So I think that's where we're coming from in terms of we need to look at the shortfalls, and once we look at the shortfalls, when you're increasing, then we are going to be on the same page and we're going to praise you as, okay, this is a good thing. Talking about citizen economic empowerment, youth economic empowerment, these are good. I say, what is some point in time also used to have the tourism empowerment fund. But we're talking about development of both urban and rural areas. One thing for fact, we're not at the same level of education. So if you're going to get, I'm going to have a company, I need to fill in these very good forms that the government has put up. I will probably need $500,000 or almost a good amount, a good chunk of money. I'll need security. How many people in the rural areas have actually the capacity to actually write on these things, even just provide security? The fines that we have, 50,000, 20,000 kwacha, those don't need security. But look at the context. If you want to have viable businesses, with 20,000 kwacha, what kind of a viable business are you going to have? We're going to probably just lock ourselves in poverty. People will just be getting that money. That's why probably they're even failing to pay some of them. We need to find ways of how do we help communities. Now we're talking about Muchinga province is the highest level of poverty, which is talking about 76% if I stand to be corrected. how are we going to help Mchinga communities there? We're talking about high literacy levels. We're talking about people who haven't really been to school, don't have the capacity to write, even just fill up these forms. How are we going to help them? So for us, the aspect of poverty reduction is developing strategies that actually respond to the people's needs, and that's what we are looking at. I'll let my colleagues add this.
Okay, you can switch off your mic. Okay.
Okay, just to add on the poverty reduction part, I think I will steal a line from you where you mentioned, especially in terms of agriculture, one of the incentives is land allocation for small-scale farmers and whatnot. But if you read the newspapers not too long ago, there are projections of us having flash floods as well as droughts. So in as much as there's going to be land that's allocated towards these farmers, what are the mitigation measures in the budget that are going to address this? Because if we do experience flash floods, we do experience drought, that means we're going to have hunger in this country. The cost of living is going to go even higher. So that means the poverty levels will even go higher. What I'm trying to say is, in addressing poverty, we already have the situation currently where the price of milling meal is as high as it is. So what are the mitigation measures that the government has put in place for us not to experience such a situation in 2024? So that's my contribution in that regard. In terms of looking at the theme that's talking about unlocking economic potential, economic isn't just mining, economic isn't just agriculture. We also have tourism. And when we look at the incentives that are currently on the ground, they are more in support of foreigners, let me say. The whole issue of removing visas. But how about me? How about me, who's Zambian, who wants to explore the tourism sectors or the tourism, let me just say, amenities that we have in this country? What incentives are there that will propel me as by Zambian to also contribute to the national cake by utilizing those amenities that we have in that sector? Because the more I utilize those, I add to the national cake, I'm contributing towards the resource, towards our revenue pool. And in a way, whether directly or indirectly, it might help in reducing poverty. What else do I want to say? Yes, so it's mainly about sort of promoting economic, should I say, preparedness, because we do not know what we have going forward in 2024. So, yeah, I think that's what I want to add regarding the poverty issue.
Okay. Just a moment, honorable members. Just a moment. I see that's Honorable Mulunda and Honorable Major had asked, and now they have follow-up questions. Then we have. Okay. Before we go to the, let's deal with the follow-up just very briefly. Honorable Mulunda.
Thank you very much. I'll be very, very brief. Number one, Caritas, according to the analysis, you are supposed, our understanding is that you are going to give us alternatives or solutions when you talk about the budget. Now, when you are saying the budget gave us figures, yes, for teachers, say 3,000 or so, or 4,000, we wanted to hear from your research, that from our research, the deficit is about 15,000. So 2,000 or 3,000 is nothing. So we thought you give us those other than coming to ask us, 3,000, what's the deficit? We're supposed to have brought that one. Thank you very much. That's the first one.
Honorable Mijelo?
No, there is another one, short one.
Sorry, we'll take just that one. Honorable Mijelo. Mike, Honorable Mulunda, sorry.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Yes, Caritas Zambia, thank you for your responses. Caritas Zambia, I think climate change is here to stay. And really, we are very much aware, and almost every Zambian is aware about the climate change. And just recently, I think we've seen the report that there will be a lot of flash floods in some areas, especially southern province. And also there will be a period of a dry period. It is also going to be experienced as well. Now that we are going to face such scenario, okay, and according to your analysis in the budget, that you didn't see any alternative, okay, to counter that on the part of a climate resilient. What do you think as Caritas Zambia? Where are we missing? Is there anything which you can help the government that now that we are going to have a flash floods and we are going also to have, okay, some dry spells, what do you think that the government can do to counter that? Give a solution. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Okay, so as you respond, just take a tab on those who get the following ones from Honorable Dr. Kalila, Honorable Mute, and Honorable Kambon. We are coming. Caritas? I did this a long time ago, sir. They raised in the first, you have just raised your hand. Caritas, we were coming, you ask.
Okay. Just looking at, I think there was a question of, do we have the numbers?
No. I said before you respond to those, keep a tab for those two, because those are follow-up questions. So let's have a question from Honorable Dr. Kalila, Honorable Mute, and Honorable Kambon. Then you respond to those, yes. Honorable Kalila.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. So, Caritas, they are still making some consultations. Can I go ahead now?
You are ready?
Yeah, so
okay.
Chair, I recognize that Caritas represent a very big constituency of our citizens, and so one would like to listen to them, knowing very well that they carry the views of the majority of our people. My question is in the health sector, and I note that they have expressed some dissatisfaction. They have expressed some dissatisfaction in the performance of the health sector, which I want to understand, so that I can then also interrogate the minister and others. So the allocation to the health sector has been progressing steadily from 8% in 2021. We are now at close to 12%, 3% short of their budget. Okay? Secondly, the shortfall in the health sector, just for your information, is 70,000. The country requires 140,000 health workers. We are somewhere around 70. But we are, again, if you notice, Chair, first recruitment was 11,200. Last year, 3,000. Next year, 4,000. Total 18,000, meaning that there's an attempt to bridge the gap. So I really want to understand where is your dissatisfaction, sir, so that I can then, because if you look at the various sectors, there's, including the money, there's an increase. So maybe you can make me clear there.
Okay, so maybe as you also respond to that one, because in your presentation you have indicated that the next year's budget, the health sector has been given, in terms of the allocation, has increased to 17%. So you need to clarify that. I just thought of yeah, that's what they indicated. So you need to clarify on that one. Honorable Newton.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. And I can take this opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Chinga Mutu. I represent Kalab Central. On page 6, where they indicate our key messages on the 2024 national budget, paragraph 1 is the lack of emphasis on employment, particularly for Zambia's youth, and the inadequate focus on skills building and the industrial sector development are notable shortcomings. And they further say, we are concerned about the lack of political will. I would want maybe Caritas to explain what they really mean when they say there's a lack of political will. Alluding to the fact that in the CDF for 2022, 2023, and even the 2024, there are components there or sections which deal with empowerment for women, empowerment for youths, both loans and grants. Also a section of skills bursaries for youths, that is in the CDF. Then, Honorable Chair, on page 8, paragraph 7, line number 3 from the bottom, where they state, it is in the public domain that the 2023 CDF disbursement stands at the average of 6 million per constituency, and we are in the last quarter of the year. The fundamental question that begs an answer is how possible is it for the ministry to finish disbursement of the remaining 22.3? Honorable Chair, I would want to find out from Caritas how much knowledgeable they are in matters related to CDF, whether they have gone through the guidelines that regulate the disbursement of CDF. That is one. Whether Caritas is aware that there's a waiver concerning the mopping of funds at the end of the financial year, that those funds are never mopped back to the Ministry of Finance, and that is Caritas aware that the government, through the Ministry of Finance, has such 100% for 2022 provided or disbursed all the 25.7 million to each constituency. That is the 2022 financial year. And if Caritas is not aware, why hasn't Caritas taken effort to find out how these funds are being disbursed? Honorable Chair, you saw me walking out. I called the treasurer for Kalabo District Council. The CDF Kalabo account, Kalabo Central, has 16 million. Now, Honorable Chair, is 16 million equivalent to 6 million, which is stated here? And now, which is correct? Is it 6 million or 16 million? I'm talking about Kalabo Central. So I would like to get that justification from Caritas.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Kamboni. Your mic, sir.
Your suggestions are very dangerous, extremely dangerous. You are saying we went to IMF just simply to get a loan. No. This country was on the verge of collapsing. We had defaulted. By now, most of the assets would have been taken. And we went to IMF to get confidence so that we would discuss with these people we owed. Our axes were like this. Each one we owed had an axe here. They didn't trust us anymore. And for us to gain that confidence, that would discuss with the data, with the people we owed, we needed somebody who would assure with a clean record. And that was the only answer we had. You are talking of going to these minerals. Where is the capital? Where is the capital for us to start digging all these mines, even exploration? We don't have the money. How about the elephant in the house, the huge debt that we have? So as you're analyzing this, let's not be very academic. Even CDF you're talking about, you ask the finance minister. The observation, there are still constituencies that still have more than 25 million in their account that they have not used. For more money to be sent, you make returns. If we have not done that, there's no need for the ministry to send more money. I still have money in my constituency, still at 16 million. I'm not complaining about the other money not being sent. So the point really we are trying to say is, as you are advising us here, get the real situation of Zambia that it has. And then you can give us correct advice that will help us improve the situation we are in. But this idea of talking like, you know, we have all these minerals, why are we borrowing, blah, blah, I think we need more realistic approach to this budgeting. Thank you.
Coordinators, what you do is, I know you have a myriad of questions, comments, just briefly, maybe in general, I think summarize these comments so that we take the last round of questions.
Maybe I can start with the last comment, Chair.
Yeah, yes, whichever order.
Kaita Zambia is aware of the debt crisis that the country has. And we are one of the organizations who are actually campaigning in terms of, or even trying to push the government of find a solution towards that debt crisis. And we are also one of the organizations that even applauded to employ the government when they actually made that headway with the IMF and said this is a good idea. Our submission is that we acknowledge what the government has done and we acknowledge the parameters, what we need to do with the IMF. In as we acknowledge that, we should not forget our people. Those we have all these indicators and all these benchmarks that we need to follow, which is a good thing. But however, what we need to look at, we should not have a positive economy and leave the people behind. And that's what we are looking at. And for us, what we are saying about issues of mining and all this, Zambia has that potential. My question or concern is, the budget is talking about unlocking that potential. How can we help ourselves, the citizens themselves, and ourselves in terms of unlocking that potential? And what we're trying to suggest now is that, look, the artisanal that's where the potential is. How can we harness that particular sector and ensure that it's vibrant? We're talking about, yes, there are loans and everything else, but we need strategies. We need a policy to deal with that. There are a lot of minerals that are leaving the country that we are not seeing. I think the Auditor General has made a lot of mention towards that. We're supposed to have the machines that actually look at the minerals that leave the country. In some of the borders, they don't have that. So it's the aspect of how do we ensure that we block all these leakages that we have.
Honorable Kamboni,
yes.
Through the chair.
So our contention is that, yes, we need money to invest in the system. Why don't we put money there?
Honorable members, Honorable Mulunda, if you go, then we are collapsing the quorum. Honorable members, you know your provisions. Before you continue, sir, you know your provisions, honorable members, in terms of what we are supposed to do. The witness has presented a document, and this is their thought. Whether you have reservations about it, it is allowed, and this is our work. So we won't go in that road. Let them respond. We have given them questions. Let them respond. Okay, you can continue.
Yes. I know there are a lot of differences of views of how we can manage the mining sector. Kaita Zambia has maintained for the past many years that we are not doing enough to close the loopholes in the mining sector. I think there has been a lot of researches where we have been told we are losing almost $3 million a year in the mining sector. And this aspect of how do we ensure that we have the right people in those particular institutions, how do we ensure that if you look at the trends reports, it tells us it's the local Zambians who are actually siphoning this money. So how do we close that gap? Some of these things is about policies. They don't need money to actually take there. So for Kaita Zambia, we still maintain that we need robust policies in the sector. We need deliberate strategy in how we can actually deal with the corruption and whatever is happening in the artisanal mining sector, even just the big mining companies. So I think that's our position. When you talk about issues of political will, the political will, what we mean is, for instance, I think there was mentioned that we need the actual numbers. What is the shortfall? I think our honorable members actually mentioned that there is now a shortfall, a known figure in the health sector. And that's what we are looking at. What is the shortfall, and in terms of the health sector, what is the shortfall in the education sector? Once we know these figures, then we're looking at how do we close this particular gap. And for us to close the gap, especially if you look at the education, the health sector itself, diseases are not waiting. We are just from a pandemic now. We need a lot of nurses, we need a lot of doctors, we need the infrastructure. So in as much as we have a game plan in terms of how we're going to close that gap in the next 3 years, but the healthy needs are now, not tomorrow. And we need the healthy population to actually become more productive. Talking about issues of unlocking potentials, we need the health sector. We need the healthy population. If I'm sick today, that means tomorrow I cannot be productive. My production becomes low. So how do we increase the levels of increment in terms of the health sector? We're talking about issues of salaries, we're talking about equipment, we talk about drug supply. How do we deal with that in the shortest period of time? I think that's our contention. So we need to, when we talk about issues of political, we were talking about being deliberate of how the government is actually going to deal with those particular problems. I think that's what we meant by issues of political will, having policies and being quite emphatic about it. Talking about the agriculture sector, climate change, yes, is upon us. So what we look, as Caritas Zambia, our emphasis has always been we need to look at issues of conservation farming, where we use less of fertilizer, less of mechanical plowing, because these are the ones which we think, as Caritas Zambia, actually contributing towards issues of environmental pollution and even just reduction of some of the outputs that we actually have. So Caritas Zambia is always promoting the issues of conservation farming. Even so, we talk about how do we ensure that we have seeds that are quite, looking at issues of climate change now, how do we promote seeds that are quite viable and are quite adaptive to the environment that we actually have? So those are the things that we're looking at as Caritas Zambia. Talk about CDF. We acknowledge the increment. I think I made mention to this, which is a good thing. The issue that we have is the aspect of absorptive capacity. The council, yes, can have access to all these funds, but as I already mentioned, they are based on issues of return. You finish this particular thing, then you can actually claim. But a lot of councils are still having that particular challenge, and we haven't dealt with the issues of capacities at constituency levels. All constituencies are not at the same level. Even just the aspect of absorptive capacity is not at the same level. So how are we increasing the capacities of these constituencies? There are some constituencies that have not used all these funds that were allocated for this particular year, and we're only remaining with 3 months. Our contention is, how do we help those particular constituencies? Next year, they're going to have 30 million, and they already have a backlog this year. So how do we help those particular constituencies in dealing with their project and also speeding up? So those are the things that we are looking at. So government can disperse, yes, but are the councils having the capacity to actually utilize those particular funds? I think that's a challenge that we actually have.
Thank you.
I'm not sure whether I've answered all the questions.
I think generally we have done that. We will take the last and the very last one from, I think it's a comment from Honorable Mukwasa.
Thank you so much, Chair. Mine is just a comment on CDF, and I think my honorable colleagues have stated that in some constituencies CDF has been received, which is true, but the other truth is that just like you rightly said, that some constituencies have not received. That is also true, because it's not all the constituencies that have received. Then on the issue of the returns, it's not just the returns. I think it's just a government, there's a system maybe that they are using, but there are quite a number of constituencies that have not received. So not to come again.
Honorable members, honorable members, can we have order, please? Yes,
So my point is that there are some constituencies that have not received, and they are also.
Honorable Mandandi. Okay.
So yeah, so that's the position. I just wanted the witness to know that he didn't miss his word. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Honorable Kalitas, thank you very much for coming, and we will take your submission as it is. Couple of the laws of Zambia in terms of the provision of the immunity will also end here. Do have a great day. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Honorable members. Honorable Mabenga, you please take a seat. No, you can take a seat.
We have seen a propensity the debates, the questioning, the making of laws, the confrontation. The live parliamentary proceedings are aired on Parliament TV every Tuesday to Thursday at 14:30 hours and Fridays at 09 hours. Make a date. Parliament TV, bringing Parliament closer to you.